Boris's Brexit left Northern Ireland behind, isolated. We warned him of the risks, but sadly now we've seen the worst violence in Northern Ireland for many years. Businesses struggling, supermarket shelves lie empty as Boris's Northern Ireland protocol begins to unravel. And now the government's being taken to court for breaching the original peace agreement and the very act of union that joins the four countries of the UK together. So we talk to two people at the centre of this escalating crisis. This is TICE Talk. Hello and welcome. So the recent violence seen in Northern Ireland is extremely worrying. Earlier this month, we saw rioting in several towns and cities in the province. There was unilateral condemnation from governments in Belfast, London, Dublin, even the US, calling quite rightly for calm. Police used water cannons to dispel crowds for the first time in many years. The violence has now subsided, but tensions remain high, and there is very real concern that one of the underlying causes of this is because loyalists in Northern Ireland feel abandoned by the UK government and that Northern Ireland is no longer being treated as an integral part of the UK due to the Brexit deal that Boris Johnson signed with the EU. Well, joining me to talk through this complicated, difficult situation with all the ramifications is my friend Dr. David Bull. I mean, we always knew that this was going to be challenging, given the way that the Prime Minister set up the Northern Ireland Protocol. And we hoped, didn't we, that in the transition period, the free trade deal negotiations would provide solutions. That was the basis on which we consented to it. But how's it playing out?
Well, I think it is extremely worrying. I think the violence that we've seen in Northern Ireland is really a very sharp reminder of what is at stake here. And as you know, Boris's mantra was get Brexit done, wasn't it? But you see, the thing was, it's a total fudge. It's been a fudge from the beginning. We warned about it. They didn't listen. And, I think the chickens are coming home to roost. And quite simply, it's not going to go away, and something dramatic needs to be done.
So I suppose what we've got to do is remind ourselves how it came about. And in a sense, I was very struck by the previous Taoiseach, Enda Kenny. He said that actually the issues of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland could be dealt with if there was goodwill and using good technology for both sides. And then when he was replaced, that was the moment that the EU essentially weaponised the negotiations and used the border to cause huge problems for what was then Theresa May. And things went badly from there.
They did. I mean, that's the understatement of the year. I mean, if you think back, that vote we had was in 2016. It was a lifetime ago. And essentially, just to be fair to everyone involved, this has been a very tricky problem to solve. The fact is that it brought down Theresa May, as you rightly say. She had a deal. It was voted down 3 times. She left office. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was then elected with a very strong mandate on those words, get Brexit done. But essentially, the problem is that you've got a very complicated problem, which is the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. We've been in the European Union for over 40 years. And so geographically and politically, this is a very difficult square to circle. So the problem that we've got is that when you look at the landmass, and I do just want to show you the first of these graphics, just to show you what we are dealing with, which is the United Kingdom. Here you are, the United Kingdom, obviously with England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. By its very nature, there is a border between now the United Kingdom, a sovereign country, and the European Union. But of course, we had to be incredibly careful because in these deals, we know that no one wanted a border on the island of Ireland. We knew that this was politically very sensitive. You and I grew up in very dark times in Northern Ireland, and no one wanted to see that. Now, there was a lot of talk there, wasn't there, as you say, about technological challenges, about how we can overcome this. We didn't need a border. But what did they do? They fudged it, and they did this. And they essentially, even though the border is between Northern Ireland and the European Union. They fudged it by sticking a customs border in the Irish Sea. And that meant that Northern Ireland remained in the single market as part of the European Union, the customs border in the Irish Sea. And I feel very strongly about this. Northern Ireland and people of Northern Ireland are right. They got annexed. They are no longer part of the United Kingdom. And you can see very clearly from that graphic.
And we warn Boris Johnson, the risks of this. But essentially, this is what he does. He uses his three-word slogans, and then, frankly, like many salesmen, he ignores the detail. And I think this is the real danger. And we're gonna have some great discussions as to what should happen now.
I think the real worry for me now is actually it's starting to unravel. We warned about it. We now know that goods are not free flowing. We know there are shortages of various goods and products, and Northern Ireland simply isn't being treated fairly. Now Brussels is obviously saying, oh well, actually we can actually get round this. We can have dynamic alignment, which essentially means we have to do what they tell us, and that isn't Brexit. That's not what we would agree to. And what I think is really fascinating, the Telegraph, and there's a graphic here, and there's a very important lawyer called James Webber, who's a top Brexit lawyer, and he says, I think it's pretty clear, isn't it, from that headline?
It's a fantastic headline. I mean, it really is. It's unworkable. And we've been saying that really for a very long time.
It's unworkable. And until politicians in Westminster understand it is unworkable and it's not tenable, it won't change.
And let's remember, of course, it was the European Union at the height of the vaccine crisis earlier this year. It's the EU that threatened to use Article 16 of the protocol to essentially create a hard border in order to prevent vaccines from going from the Republic through to Northern Ireland.
As you know, I was incensed by this. The whole point is we spent years talking about not putting up a border on the island of Ireland, and the EU played it. They played it to their advantage.
They did.
The minute they're in trouble, they then say, right, we're going to have a border on the island of Ireland. I mean, it was shocking. It was downright despicable.
Everyone was furious, and they did, in fairness. They withdrew it just after a matter of hours because they realised they had completely overstepped the mark.
Politically very difficult, wasn't it?
But they showed their true colours, and we need now to use that moral high ground that we've got, and that's the issue. We need the Prime Minister to show some courage.
I think that's right. Actually, you and I know that this is all about timing, and actually this is an extraordinary time. The Prime Minister actually has a lot of political capital. Now he just needs to decide whether to use it.
Brilliant. David, thank you very much. Well, to hear more about the very real problems that the Brexit withdrawal deal has caused in Northern Ireland, we're delighted to welcome Baroness Kate Hoey, former Member of Parliament for Vauxhall. And Kate, welcome to TICE Talk. Thank you for joining us. Fantastic to have you with us. You've had so much experience and knowledge with Northern Ireland, with the challenges. The scenes of violence and rioting earlier this month were obviously shocking and distressing for all of us. It'd be really good just to get your sense on what caused that specific moment. What was the tipping point, and where you think the situation is now a couple of weeks later?
Well, I think it's been a very serious situation in Northern Ireland over the last few weeks. I mean, people have begun to, not just begun, but have really seriously now seen the effects of the protocol. And that has come about with everybody's everyday life, not being able to get things delivered from England, the whole ridiculous thing of soil not being able to, British soil being brought to Northern Ireland. Every day something new comes up that is all part and parcel of the protocol. But the actual disturbances were also created because in the same week there was a huge funeral, an IRA funeral last year, the Story funeral, and of course hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people turned up to that, including the leader of Sinn Féin. And there was no prosecutions came along after that, even though other people had been going to their funeral with family funerals with 30 people allowed. So there was a great deal of anger about that, and that the way the police service in Northern Ireland had seemed to be always being careful not to upset Sinn Féin. And of course that ties in with the whole idea that the protocol came about because of the threats of violence that would happen if the trade border was put where in any normal situation, it would be put at the frontier. Yeah. And the frontier, of course, is with the Republic of Ireland. So that all highlighted. And I think a lot of young people in particular in pro-union loyalist communities really did feel that they'd been abandoned by the United Kingdom government. And they felt, well, hang on, look, it looks like violence achieves things. So maybe we should have a go at it. And of course that, we know that is not what should be happening. And we've got to make sure that the politicians and the government realises that they cannot go on allowing this protocol to disrupt life in Northern Ireland and to make people feel that they are being cut off from the rest of the United Kingdom.
Well, Kate, in the negotiations, the Northern Ireland Protocol, the EU, and Rich and I were there in the European Parliament, the EU was adamant there must not be a hard border on the island of Ireland. And yet, in the COVID crisis, they then threatened to trigger it by essentially trying to block vaccine exports to Northern Ireland, to the rest of the United Kingdom. How damaging has that been in terms of the very delicate balance that was achieved?
Well, I think what it proved, the fact that they were prepared to invoke Article 16, meant that they really didn't actually care at all about the peace process in Northern Ireland or about what was happening. What they used the whole Irish issue and the question of a trade border had been very deliberately and cleverly used by the European Union as a weapon to actually make the United Kingdom pay for daring to leave their wonderful club. So it was actually, it showed people in Northern Ireland from all communities who have suffered from the protocol. I mean, the protocol is not about nationalism versus unionism in that sense. The fact that you can't get something from England isn't differentiating whether you're a Catholic or a Protestant. And of course, that showed the EU could decide arbitrarily to invoke Article 16, which makes the campaign to invoke Article 16 much, much stronger now from our side, because we can say, well, hang on, if you did it for that, we would like it completely invoked and completely destroyed.
So if we just remind our viewers what Article 16 says, it actually says that you can invoke Article 16 if there are serious economic, societal or environmental difficulties for Northern Ireland.
That's right. So they can take unilateral action. But it's very sort of woolly, isn't it, around what that might entail.
Exactly. And so essentially, life in Northern Ireland now, Kate, is it clear that actually, in a sense, the challenges facing people mean that actually that is the situation? You've got serious economic issues. Supermarket shelves are not full of the goods they used to be full of, for example.
Yes, I mean, people aren't starving or anything like that, but the reality is we can't get a lot of the products that we did, and businesses are suffering. And in fact, businesses in Great Britain are suffering too, because many of them now have chosen not to bother to send to Northern Ireland. I mean, I know many people who are organic farmers who can't get the seeds from Great Britain because the companies there say, look, it's not worth our while sending these over to Northern Ireland. So there are economic difficulties, but there are also really serious societal differences, because the idea of the Belfast Agreement was that the North-South relationship and the East-West, Northern Ireland, Great Britain relationships were to be treated as important. And of course, what we've seen is the North-South relationship being overriding the East-West relationship. And so obviously people who have a loyalty to the United Kingdom do feel that they have been abandoned. Therefore, the societal difficulties that we've seen with the violence, but now we're seeing nearly every day smaller processions, smaller protests, non-violent because there's a real attempt to keep this peaceful. But people are going out on the streets in little villages all over Northern Ireland protesting. And that is, to me, a societal problem. And therefore, Article 16 could be invoked.
That's interesting, because we don't hear that on the news here about the small...
You won't hear anything unless it's violent. The BBC particularly are only interested in loyalist violence. They're not even interested when there were riots in Derry a few months ago. It got hardly any coverage because basically there is a kind of feeling that Northern Ireland has to be treated differently, and therefore you do that by always making sure that the people who are loyal to the United Kingdom are kind of ignored.
Can I just ask a quick question, though? So, given the Northern Ireland Protocol doesn't work, is it enough to invoke Article 16, or do you want the whole thing scrapped?
Oh, I mean, I would like to see the protocol just simply, destroyed. I mean, all the tinkering around that the government has done, and ministers have brought in grace periods and extended it.
Yep.
We have to remember that Northern Ireland, very simply, has been left in the European Union single market. And therefore, as Great Britain diverges more and more, we hope, from the European Union regulations and allows us to trade globally, Northern Ireland will be further and further apart. And that is playing absolutely into the hands of those people who want to destroy the United Kingdom. So it's not just a question, an issue for people in Northern Ireland. It should matter to everyone in the United Kingdom.
That's right, because essentially what you're confirming is that Northern Ireland has been left behind. It is isolated from the other three nations of the United Kingdom. And unless the government gets its act together and shows some real courage, that situation is going to get worse, not better.
Absolutely. And of course, we have to remember that the biggest trade for Northern Ireland is with Great Britain. There's actually very little trade goes over the border to the Republic. So while, of course, the EU wants to protect its internal market, it should be doing that in a much, much less brutal way. It could be done much, much more simply. And of course, the Irish government has played along with the EU. But I think now, even in the Irish Republic, there beginning to be recognition that while the European Union might have liked them and used them, that once this is all sorted in terms of us having finally left and the trade agreement signed, the Irish government may find that it's not actually as popular in the European Union. And we may see some move towards leaving the EU and the Republic of Ireland.
Well, you see, I remember Enda Kenny, the previous Taoiseach, before Varadkar, he said with goodwill and technology, actually the situation could be dealt with. It's the sort of technology that you see Federal Express or DHL use when tracking goods and parcels that are delivered to all of our homes every day. And it's shocking that that still is being resisted. But for me, that's always been the way forward, and that's why, actually, as you say, the whole protocol could be scrapped.
And am I right in thinking that the free trade agreement hasn't been signed yet? I know very well that the EU runs to its own timetable, doesn't it? It likes to do things when it feels like it. So have we got a moment in time where we could actually say, right, we're not signing it, let's bin it?
I think realistically that's just not going to happen. I mean, the government is very keen to get that trade agreement signed by the European Parliament, but the European Parliament has itself delayed and delayed and delayed. And the protocol behind the scenes has been used as one of, they want the United Kingdom to come out and absolutely commit 100% to, dotting every dot and crossing every T. And so I genuinely don't think that will happen. But I think that once the trade agreement has been signed, hopefully very, very soon, then that will mean that people will start realising that, now is the time then to actually attack the protocol. But, Richard, what you said about Enda Kenny is absolutely right. There were lots of negotiations going on. Varadkar came in as a Taoiseach and just changed things completely. Now, interestingly, the current Taoiseach, of course, there's a coalition now in the Republic, has been much, much softer on this. That's why I detect within the Irish government perhaps an idea that they really, if they're serious about wanting to actually work closely with Northern Ireland and get people in Northern Ireland to not see them as the enemy, then they really need to sort this out. And the British government needs to recognise they must get rid of the protocol, and as soon as possible.
That's a brilliant way to finish, with some interesting positivity about the attitude of the Irish government under the new Taoiseach. Kate, thank you so much indeed for those thoughts. Really, really do appreciate it. Absolutely wonderful update on the situation, literally, as it's going on now in Northern Ireland. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Well, that was fascinating. I mean, Kate, gave us an amazing, up-to-date situation, much of which we just don't have properly reported.
No, and I thought what was fascinating, she said Northern Ireland has been annexed. It's been forgotten. It is not part of the United Kingdom. We're still in the European Union. Not acceptable.
It's not acceptable, and there are daily, weekly difficulties with trade, with businesses, between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. And for my mind, that is clear economic, societal, environmental difficulties, and that Article 16 should be invoked. Boris Johnson needs to show some courage.
He does, although she says scrap it entirely, and I thought that was fascinating.
Fascinating. Thank you, David. Well, not only is the Northern Ireland Protocol causing serious distress and divisions on the island of Ireland, but it may also be illegal. Ben Habib is a businessman and one of our former colleagues in the European Parliament as a Brexit MEP, and he is taking the UK government to court, and he joins us now with us. Ben, hi, welcome to TICE Talk. Thanks for joining us. So, I mean,
a real pleasure.
You identified the challenges with the protocol. You were one of the first to really get on it, dig into the detail, and you relentlessly have criticised it and attacked it. And now, you're essentially taking the government to court on it. It'd be great to have your sort of the reasons why, the basis of your court action, and the likely timing of it.
Yeah, well, you know, the reason I got onto the protocol was because in that one document, all Boris Johnson's promises for Brexit were broken. You know, when he says take back control of your laws, he can't deliver that promise with having the European Court of Justice in charge of Northern Ireland. When he says take back control of your borders, he can't deliver that promise if there's a border down the Irish Sea. When he says take control of our cash, you can't deliver that when you're giving over to European Union excise duties and VAT rates, and and so on. And perhaps the most pernicious aspect of the protocol is actually something we haven't even begun to feel the effects of, which is the dynamic alignment of Northern Ireland with European Union state aid laws. So, for example, businesses in Northern Ireland and indeed Great Britain businesses in Great Britain that operate in Northern Ireland could be prohibited from taking advantage of coronavirus bounce-back loans because they'd fall foul of European Union state aid laws. So this is something that hasn't really bubbled to the surface. So I've been, as you said, Richard, a vocal critic of it because I think it drove a coach and horses through the Prime Minister's promises. Yep. But more importantly, and actually it's something that I was a bit slow to get onto, to be frank, is it actually drives a coach and horses through the constitutional settlement of the entire United Kingdom, and specifically Northern Ireland. And I say that for two reasons. The first is that the Act of Union 1800, Article 6 of the Act of Union 1800, makes it very clear that every part of the United Kingdom should have equal and unfettered access to every other part of the United Kingdom. And it also states that every citizen within the United Kingdom must be treated equally with every other citizen. It's kind of obvious stuff. But when you put a border down the Irish Sea and you make British citizens who just happen to be living in Northern Ireland, born and living in Northern Ireland, subject to a whole swathe of different laws, you make it impossible for the Act of Union to be adhered to. And more importantly, perhaps, from the Irish perspective, it also drives the coach and horses through the Belfast Agreement. So before I come to that, as we all know, the European Union kind of hijacked the Belfast Agreement.
Yep.
And it drove this narrative that a border on the island of Ireland would actually undermine that agreement. In fact, that agreement came into being in part in order to recognize a border on the island of Ireland. Until we had the Belfast Agreement, Ireland was in fact laying claim to Northern Ireland. So it was through the Belfast Agreement that the border became recognized. And we already have a border there. There's been one there for 100 years. It separates two countries, two currency regions, two different tax rates, and a whole host of other things. So this notion that you can't have a border on the island of Ireland is a completely false notion. But the aspect of the Belfast Agreement that the protocol breaches is that it's been foisted on the people of Northern Ireland without a cross-community vote of the people. And that's a central pillar of the Belfast Agreement. And the way our government tried to give effect to this, it's very, very sneaky. The way they tried to do it was to use a statutory instrument, so that's using a government instrument to create laws without going to Parliament, to vary the Northern Ireland Act of 1998 on which the Belfast Agreement is predicated, and to remove from it the requirement for cross-community consent. and to transpose into that act the approval processes set out in the protocol. So they actually robbed the Northern Irish people of the right to cross-community consent.
So essentially,
by breaking the law.
They knew the problem. The government lawyers identified the problem, and sneakily, they basically tried to sort of deal with the legalese.
And perhaps I could ask you, Ben, given the serious nature of this, the fact Kate Hoey says that Northern Ireland has been forgotten, has been annexed, and the fact you're taking them to court, and yet we hear nothing on the mainstream media. I mean, that in itself is shocking.
It is utterly shocking. It's an absolute abrogation of all responsibility by the media that they haven't covered the only country in history to voluntarily partition itself, the only country in history to voluntarily give up part of its regions to the hegemony of a third party. I can't even say a third country because it's not even a country. It's just a supranational institution to which we've handed over Northern Ireland. It's an absolute travesty.
Well, that's fantastic, and thank heavens that you've launched this action. Tell us who you've launched it with, and what's the timing of the case?
Okay, so we've got a joint collection of unionists from Northern Ireland. So they include Arlene Foster, Kate Hoey, who you've just spoken to, Jim Allister, who's head of the traditional unionist voice of Northern Ireland, Steve Aiken, who's head of the Ulster Unionist Party, and of course Arlene Foster, who's First Minister and leader of the DUP. So we've got all the unionists. But not only that, we've got Lord Trimble himself, Nobel Peace Prize winner, for his work on the Belfast Agreement. So if people don't believe us when we say it breaches the Belfast Agreement, they should at least believe him. He was an architect and a proponent of it. So we've got all the unionist voices.
And what's the time? And that's amazing. So what's the timing now from here, Ben, for the case?
And what are your chances?
Yeah.
Well, the reason, Dave, I'll just answer your question first, David. The reason we launched the case was when I asked John Larkin, retired former Attorney General of Northern Ireland, for a legal opinion on the matter. He didn't come back, as you'd expect most lawyers to, with a kind of qualified ifs and buts sort of opinion. He simply said this protocol is unlawful. Right. And he set out a number of grounds for it. I've only gone over 2 grounds with you, the 2 most important. But there are lots of other reasons why it's illegal. And it was the strength of his opinion that gave me the courage. And I underwrote all the costs, as you may know. It gave me the courage to say, right, fine, I'm in it for 200 grand to make this happen.
Wow, fantastic!
If I have to.
And have you got a date yet for the
we have.
hearing? Which is when?
Yeah. So the date, there's going to be a High Court hearing in Belfast on the 13th of May. That should last 5 days. That should last 5 days, and then we're going to have a ruling, we think, in June. But whichever party loses, they're bound to appeal it. So I think there will be a Supreme Court hearing.
This has incredible constitutional and legal significance, what you're doing, Ben, which is extraordinary. And just before we finish, Ben, one final question. We talked with Kate about Article 16, and in a sense, the big judgment is, would you rather see initially the government invoke Article 16 with a view to renegotiating things, or would you rather just scrap the whole protocol full stop?
Well, the basis of my criticism is that the protocol itself is illegal. So to rely on a provision of the protocol to try and undo the protocol, I think would be disingenuous.
Yep.
I think what needs to happen is that Boris Johnson needs, at some point in his career as Prime Minister, to face up to the obligations and promises he made, and to put the border for customs, it's not a hard border, no one's suggesting military installations, put the border for customs on the island of Ireland. And if he won't do it, we will get a Supreme Court ruling forcing him to do it. And probably it will be his successor that implements it. Because I can't imagine any Prime Minister could survive being found to have broken fundamental aspects, not just the Constitution of the Union of the United Kingdom, but the Belfast Agreement itself.
Fantastic. Well, Ben, all power to your elbow. Thank you so much for those thoughts, explaining that. It's going to be, it's going to be a really, really important couple of months, legally, constitutionally. Thank you, Ben. That's great.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Well, that was fascinating. I mean, Ben Habib there, crystal clear. He's very confident about this legal action.
He is so driven. When we were in the European Parliament, he was determined to get this through. I think he's done an amazing job. And the very fact that lawyer said to him, no, the Northern Ireland Protocol is illegal, I think is very exciting, and I wish him well.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to know a lot more in the coming weeks, and it's going to be really, really important. I think legally, very powerful indeed. Well, thank you, David. So that's sadly all we've got time for this week on this Northern Ireland special. Many thanks to my amazing guests, Baroness Kate Hoey and businessman Ben Habib. And of course, thank you, the $1 Million Man, David Bull. And please do join us next week for plenty more politics, thoughts, honest opinions, challenging views. Until then, goodbye.